what has been described 4 years ago by a number of human rights organizations, Palestinian, Israeli, and international, as an apartheid regime that Israel is running within the occupied Palestinian territory and within the areas where it assumes its sovereign territory as its sovereign territory, has developed into a genocidal regime as well. We are witnessing today a fully fledged genocide in Gaza Strip, where Palestinians are murdered daily. And to be honest with you, I know that many Palestinians, especially in Gaza, envy the martyrs for having been killed, because the surviving Palestinians are suffering during their survival. We have famine that is spreading around the Gaza Strip as a result of an intentional campaign by Israel to prevent the essential needs, including food and water, from accessing the Gaza Strip. We have mass displacement in Gaza Strip, as you have heard earlier today. And we have mass destruction in the Gaza Strip, where now we have no more universities, no more courts, no more, a lot of the health facilities have been destroyed as well, and many others. We are witnessing unprecedented and unimaginable torture. Unimaginable torture. The level of torture that is happening right now in Gaza Strip and degrading treatment is not something that we can imagine that it actually exists. And I always wonder, how can any human being see the suffering that they are inflicting upon prisoners? And by the way, the prisoners are not necessarily people who Israel wants to interrogate. A lot of them are health workers. A lot of them are, just normal people. But any prisoner now is being tortured, and there is a large scale of levels of torture, but it's really unimaginable. This is all, and there is much more obviously, but this is all what we see from Gaza Strip. But also when we look at Al-Quds, Jerusalem, we can see that there is an ongoing and expanding revocation of residencies, expanding displacement on an ongoing and continuous basis. The Israeli colonial policies of dispossessing Palestinians from land in order to Judaize the land, as they themselves call it, is still continuous and is actually becoming quicker. Israel is using its own legal system, and that's why, by the way, it's called an apartheid regime. Its own legal system, its laws, in order to inflict all of these violations of international law. It uses, for example, laws like the absentee property law in order to take Palestinian land from those who have been displaced, or many of who have not been displaced, who are still in Palestine. Abandoned property law as well. Confiscation for public interest. And as His Excellency, the Minister, Minister Dr. Ashraf Al-A'war has mentioned earlier, there is a very dangerous land title settlement project happening right now in Jerusalem. Israel is registering land now. It has started this since 2018, actually, after the US recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Registering land right now on a continuous basis in order to change the ownership within the record of the Israeli government. This is, I think, the most dangerous land expropriation project since the occupation of 1967. Now, the important question, and there is much more, of course, to talk about, but I'm going to turn into the important question. What can we do? And this is the, the real question that all of us should think about. Obviously, there is an important effort right now within the United Nations General Assembly, within different member states, also in OIC, in a campaign that is aiming at getting more and more recognition of the State of Palestine, trying to get a membership of the State of Palestine in the United Nations, which is, an important campaign. However, coming from the human rights field and the civil society background, I would argue that what we really need right now is to focus on holding Israel accountable and holding complicit states accountable. Unless we manage, because at the end of the day, it's an issue of power. Israel is able to commit genocide today because it believes that it has an unlimited power, and that the states that are complicit with it, I can name a few, for example, the United States. I can name the UK, which I will mention later, and many others, Germany, for example, that these states are supporting it unconditionally in a way that will lead to continuous impunity, which we have been witnessing over the past decades. So what do we need to do right now? The first thing is individual sanctions from individual states. We've started seeing that. We already have a number of states that decided sanctions against Israel. These sanctions, I would mention Malaysia, I would mention Turkey, Colombia, and others. These sanctions are actually very effective. They send a message to Israel that it is losing internationally, but also it is actually getting people from within Israel who are seeing that their interests, their financial and economic interests are starting to be threatened, creating more and more pressure. But we also need sanctions that are decided by international organizations. International organizations including OIC, including the Arab League, but also within this power that we have through these important organizations, we can also apply pressure within the UN General Assembly to start discussing more and more sanctions. And, let me just remember that at the time when in South Africa there was an apartheid regime, at the beginning, the global North did not want to see sanctions against South Africa. But the global South led the movement, and the global South won in this movement, and eventually applied sanctions on South Africa. And later on, the global North followed the global South in a way that eventually led to the dismantlement of the apartheid regime. This is a great example before us that we can learn from, and I believe that we have to continue following up and having a significant campaign that focuses on sanctions on Israel specifically. Another thing that states can do right now is to join legal efforts, and this is something that actually OIC and the Arab League have decided already in the summit in Riyadh. It was an important summit, and there were very important resolutions that were taken during the summit. So it's very important that OIC on the one hand, but also individual states do their best to join South Africa versus Israel in order to hold Israel accountable for the genocide, but also to support other types of cases for third-party responsibility. And we have a good example of Nicaragua versus Germany, which maybe has not gotten enough coverage, but I think it's a very important case because it is, and it's not closed yet, by the way. Yes, we haven't gotten any provisional measures by the court, but it's still open, and I think it's very promising. These types of initiatives are important because they put the interest of the states that are complicit in genocide and in war crimes and crimes against humanity at risk of losing their own interests, and that's very important. This is an important theory. Finally, the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court now certainly has jurisdiction over Palestine. Recently, after Karim Khan, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, requested arrest warrants against only 2 Israeli officials, the United Kingdom has recently, just like we learned about this last week, has gone back to the ICC with a request asking to argue against the court's jurisdiction over Israelis. Basically, the crux of the argument of the UK is Palestine, because of Oslo, cannot prosecute Israelis because this is something within the Oslo agreement. Therefore, the ICC cannot prosecute Israelis in the state of Palestine, since Palestine itself does not have that right, so it cannot give it to an international court. Of course, this is not a good legal argument. There are many arguments against this, and now we have several, at least academic and civil society parties that are working, and I'm sure that also the government of the state of Palestine is also preparing for the appropriate responses in the court. But I also think that it is very important that the OIC, as an international organization, would intervene in this process. The court has actually asked any states or other parties who would like to submit an amicus curiae to the court to do so. So we have until 12th of July to submit this request. So I believe it's very important to do this intervention, because imagine that the UK succeeds in its request. In such a case, the ICC will only have jurisdiction over Palestinians, and it will be, counterproductive. There is a genocide going on, but the ICC cannot use its jurisdiction against all of these war crimes and crimes against humanity. Hence, it's very important. Finally, I would say it's very important for us to centralize fighting apartheid, including maybe by reactivating the apartheid committee within the UN General Assembly, or if the Palestine committee would take these responsibilities in a similar way that the apartheid committee did during the time of South Africa. I think that would be also, because we need a prolonged campaign to hold Israel and Israelis accountable. Without this type of campaign, we will meet in more and more conferences where we will be discussing what are the violations that Israel did, and we will still continue to feel unable to respond.